Good afternoon. My name is Callie Brooks, and I'm going to do a brief overview of the history of Common Ground Alliance, introduce Dave, and then turn it over to him. So back in 2007, a group of people gathered together to answer the question, how can we collectively be more effective in influencing the future of the Adirondack Park? Out of this came the Common Ground Alliance, an annual forum where citizens gather together to discuss important issues and then forward our needs to the legislative and executive branches of New York State government in a document we call the Blueprint for the Blue Line. After 5 years, we asked ourselves, what's next? Coming to our rescue were Dave Mason and Jim Herman, using a technique examining different scenarios for determining a shared future for the Adirondack Park. They held workshops, including residents, visitors, government employees, students, and seasonal residents. The final product was a vision and strategy for the Adirondack Park. But their work didn't stop there. Since then, they've been keeping track of our progress toward that vision. That is why we're gathered here today, to hear from Dave about our successes, failures, and the work ahead that 85% of us said was the desired future 10 years ago. A little background on Dave. Dave founded a strategy consulting firm in Boston that developed a unique tool for developing scenarios with teams facing difficult decisions. In the early days of the internet, teams often had no idea how to choose, what choices would be right for them. Diverse options were frequently hard to resolve. No one knew for sure what the next best steps were. So Dave and his partner Jim Herman brought this toolkit to problems of the Adirondacks in 2011 and 12. Dave's connection to the region go back to the 1890s when his great-grandparents came to Saranac Lake from New York for tuberculosis. The family then shifted down to Keene Valley in the 1920s, and he spent every summer in Keene until 2004 when him and Jim moved full-time to Keene. We hope you have lots of questions, so we ask that you, when you have a question, use the Q&A feature, not the chat, but if you haven't introduced yourself on the chat, please do so now. As soon as Dave is done doing the presentation, Leslie Carrison will come up and she'll facilitate any of the questions you asked. We won't answer questions during the presentation. So it's my great pleasure to introduce Dave Mason.
It's nice to be here after 10 years, wondering what was actually going on with this project. Now I can tell you what you've actually accomplished versus what you said you wanted 10 years ago. So I'm going to start by, this was called ADK Futures, and the end of it was the summer of 2012, 10 years ago. It began in the summer of 2011. It took about a year to do the work. So what did we actually do? Well, to write a set of materials, we interviewed 120 people about the Adirondacks, the future and the past of the Adirondacks, the issues it was facing. And we used those materials to run 5 two-day workshops. You can see where they were, the red pins on this map. The blue pins were where the participants came from. We did 8 short workshops. They're shown with the yellow pins, and then we did a bunch of talks around the region to larger groups. And the people that came to these, represented by these pie charts on the left, there's no one group that dominated it. We went to great lengths to get all kinds of people from all walks of life. They were mostly residents, that's the bottom chart, but there were also part-time people and non-residents and seasonal residents. We really tried to get the Noah's Ark together. What we did was give them, from the interviews, we wrote 5 end states for a 25-year future. We're only 10 years into this 25-year future. There were 5 of them. The wild park. What would it be like if we really were serious about being a wild park? A usable park, which had a recreation focus, one called the Sustainable Life, one called Adirondack County. What if the blue line were in fact a county line for New York State? Another one that said this is really all going to be handled by local government solutions, and a failure scenario where Instead of being a park, we became a state forest. So these were given to teams, and they had to do a simulated hindsight exercise, working backwards from their end state, let's say the sustainable life, and identifying a series of events that must have happened to have this come true over 25 years. At the end of these workshops, we ranked them, and C and B, these two, the usable park and sustainable life, they were ranked as the most desirable and the most achievable in every meeting with every group. Now, we had never seen anything like this in our previous work. This is a level of agreement that we certainly didn't expect to find in the Adirondack Park. So we were kind of shocked by the outcome. So what was a sustainable life? The core idea here was to localize the economy. So the localization offers growth for local needs that are currently served from outside. Eat more food from local farms, use more local wood products in construction, solar, biomass, home scale wind for local energy, community solar farms, refitting old power dams to bring more local power, broadband enabling broadband enabling remote work, simplifying what it takes to live a rural life and offering new kinds of jobs, establishing of inter-hamlet bikeways and trails, not just off into the mountains, science to help battle invasives and protect water. And it fits, a notion of it fit with the culture of self-reliance, interdependent communities living close to the land, but without harming it. So that was a sustainable life. The usable park was recreation oriented, and recreational tourism and baby boom retirees were thought to drive the economy. It would work best in towns with better amenities, and that recreation would spread out, not just be high peak centric. There'd be more indoor options, more agritourism, more ecotourism. It leveraged the unique historic and cultural assets that we have in the region. Regional coordination of marketing, a big increase in services visitors pay for that create income for residents. Hint, what would that be? Short-term rentals everywhere. We didn't think it was short-term rentals at the time, but that's what it turned out to be. More ADK branded outdoor equipment. Tourism would bring diversity to us from New York State and internationally. Government employment would drop, private sector employment would grow, and sustainable tourism would mean somehow limiting use of the forest preserve to protecting our waters. So those were the two scenarios, two end states rather. There were 16 topics covered by 120 events that were used in all these scenarios. They were set into these topics, you can see, and I'll quickly go through them in a minute. If you have a lot of interest in this, you can see how I gathered all this data on this website. It's adkfutures.net. There's another site called adkfutures.org that has all of the work of all the workshops, who came, what the groups presented, and so on. But adkfutures.net is a database that I've tracked what's happened since that time, about 1,700 items of evidence over the last 10 years. Excuse me, I have a cold. So the big shifts in 10 years were these. This is kind of the bottom line before I dive into some detail. 10 years ago, we worried about the lack of jobs, severe lack of jobs. But now the worry is lack of workforce and the rise of remote work. 10 years ago, we were talking about the lack of affordable housing then, but now it's just the lack of available housing at all. There isn't hardly anything to buy. This is true across the country. Of course, it's not unique to the Adirondacks, but it's a big problem if you're trying to get more people to come live here. 10 years ago, lack of rooms for tourists. Now we have short-term rentals everywhere, all over the park. 10 years ago, there was a desire for more tourists, but that turned into crowds on trails. And how do we deal with crowds, particularly in the high peaks and other popular areas? There wasn't much going on with solar energy 10 years ago, but now solar energy, at least for homes, is quite widespread. There was no discussion of diversity 10 years ago. Now it's an issue that's front, center, and funded. And just this week, a Black woman's been nominated to join the APA as a commissioner. 10 years ago, skepticism about electric vehicles, sort of knew something would have to happen to change how we get around the park if we were going to participate in climate change reactions. But now the success of electric vehicles is apparent. That's what it's going to be. And the question is, how long does it take to get there? So with that as a start, let's talk through some of these key events. There are recreation's obviously growing. There are new hotels and renovations in all these towns, all the major towns, and some little ones too. Short-term rentals have more rooms than traditional lodging. Read that twice. There's more rooms in short-term rentals than in all the traditional lodging in the park. This has happened over the last, I don't think 10 years, really over the last 5 years. And it's been a benefit, but it's also got a lot of side effects. Short-term rental visitor groups are larger than the groups that stay in hotels. They stay longer, they spend more. So in that sense, they're good news for the region. North Elba has a 6-month moratorium on short-term rentals at the moment. New York's funded dozens of recreations projects, the state that is. The World University Games is the big one coming in January of next year. But there are new docks and waterfront parks and fishing pond restorations and dams and locks and endless all over the park. There are parking areas and bike trails and visitor centers and new restrooms, fire tower restorations, building new trails in some areas. The rail trail from Lake Placid to Tupper is coming along, actually going to open sometime this year. Sports fields all over the place, performance spaces, all of that's been largely funded by New York State. There have been other private entities, private efforts, marinas, glamping operations, zip lines. Excuse me. Backcountry use, this is an interesting one. Backcountry use went up, even in winter. Crowding and parking issues developed, and then High Peaks hikers fell by a third last summer, while camping was setting records. So what's up with that? What's going on? We did start a parking reservation system at the AMR trailhead in Keene, might have something to do with it. Short trail systems like CATS over by Lake Champlain, the Lake George trails, Henry's Woods, they all report much heavier use. Biking is growing in several forms. So if perhaps the long stated desire to spread out recreational tourism is actually happening. And the High Peaks may lessen a bit and other areas increase. We'll know more this summer. We don't really know what caused that to fall. Biking is growing in several forms. Hamlet to Hamlet tourism trips are growing. Ecotourism is growing. The snowmobile trail system that was thought about at the time to connect hamlets did not get built. Arts and culture, different topic. Well, John Brown lives in Lake Placid, and the Underground Railroad Museum are gaining recognition in New York attention. It's become an interesting angle to efforts to diversify tourism in the park. Fort Ticonderoga has done a lot of work to reconnect itself to Lake Champlain waterfront. Arch tours are oversubscribed, often oversubscribed. You could get these tours by lottery now. There are new exhibits at the Adirondack Experience and the Wild Center. For people who don't want to walk, there's driving trails now, several of them, Lake to Locks, the first wilderness corridor, and so on. Pendragon Theater is being replaced. There's a children's museum coming to Saranac Lake. This was one of my favorites. A Star Trek fan studio in Ticonderoga is a big hit. Who knew? What a surprising thing to have happen. Lake George is building a big music festival, significant music festival. There's an integrated arts calendar finally online, and all the movie theaters made the digital conversion, which was iffy back in the day. Promotion's been successful. The state's funded a wide range of promotional programs. Ruth stepped into the role of unifying regional marketing and booking. Social media, very strong, user-powered, It can get out of control. I'm sure many of you have noticed, but it's not going away, and it does change how people move around the park. There are themed events everywhere, all over the region, all the time. Fishing events, art, music festivals, Americade and Lake George. It's endless. And if you want more people to come to your town, that's one of the things you do, come up with a themed event. Protection of waters. This came through the whole process as the star, the ground star of common effort across the region. Everybody wanted to do this. So we've set up a successful boat washing region across a boat washing system across the region. The Lake George Smart Lake project got built. There are more watershed plans, these for invasive management and stormwater funds. First, you have to have a plan, then you can go ask the state for funds to implement it. 2 dams got removed, one on the Boquet in Willsboro and one on the Ausable in Ausable Forks. There are 2 new sewer systems that got built. 2 or 3 more are coming along. There are 12 that went through significant system upgrades. The most important one to mention is the new Lake George treatment plant that just came online a few months ago. There have been a number of water systems funded. There's a lot more work to do in that area. And then there's this big cleanup project that got completed rather suddenly at Pontiac Bay and Lake Flower, right in the middle of Saranac Lake. In septic inspections, long talked about, never actually got off the ground. Well, they're now getting off the ground, both in Lake George and the Eckford chain. And just in the most recent budget, a new Adirondack Lake survey has been funded, the first since the 1980s that laid the ground for the acid rain research. The forest. The big things that happened in the forest were the completion of the Elk Lake easement in 2013 and the Finch acquisitions in 2016. The states acquired, I think, 8 small parcels since the Finch deal. Land trusts have protected 10 small parcels near Lake George. There's a very active and organized effort around Lake George to protect the lake, and 11 others in other parts of the region. So 22 parcels acquired by the land trust and 8 acquired by the state. There's been, and this is probably, at least in my opinion, the scariest part of this, of what's happened, is there's not been any notable success in stopping insects from attacking several important tree species. The adelgids attacking eastern hemlocks. There's about 250 acres in Lake George that have an infestation that's being treated. We don't know if that's really going to work or not yet. Emerald ash borer is all over New York State, and oak wilt is getting close, and the oak wilt kills red oaks in 2 months. This is not something that takes a long time. There was a feral swine problem 10 years ago, and I'm happy to say DEC took care of that. You will not be chased by feral swine when you're out hiking. Economic development. Well, one consequence of the pandemic is it really legitimized remote work, widely accepted. People came here and stayed for months and months and months and worked out of their house if they had broadband. And broadband's made lots of progress all over the park. I think that the Starlink, Musk's Starlink low Earth orbit satellite system will complete this. At least it's some, it's not cheap, but it will mean that everybody anywhere can get access if they want it. The pandemic was great for tourism. Group sizes up. The length of stay doubled over 5 years. Spending per visit is up. The pattern is bad events in nearby cities bring lots of people here. Now, we thought those bad events would be climate related and they would come later in our 25-year time frame. We didn't think of a pandemic, but here we are. And anyway, the brighter headline should be bad events of whatever sort in nearby cities bring lots of people here. And some of these can happen very suddenly, not slow like climate change is. The REDC, Regional Economic Development Corporation grant system has been a big win for the region. It's brought more money to the region, organized by sort of a bottoms-up grant writing and recruitment process that's been hugely successful and continues to be a dynamic activity in the region. 8 towns are working with Main Street revitalization grants. 14 towns have gotten smart growth grants. ANCA is having a lot of success with something called the Center for Businesses in Transition. So if you've been running your small business in the park for most of your life and you want to retire, the Center for Businesses in Transition will help you do that, sell your business to someone else who actually wants to live here and operate it on an ongoing basis. There's also Point Positive, an angel investing group in Saranac Lakes, funded 11 companies. The Lake George Gateway project is pushing for year-round growth in that area. Manufacturing is growing around the park. Semiconductors in Saratoga, subway cars and buses in Plattsburgh, boats in Queensbury, drones in Rome, and yogurt in Johnstown. I mean, it's really pretty robust compared to what it was. The Jano mine up in Clifton and Fine has been cleaned up. The rail access has been rebuilt. There's a big solar project, a solar build ready area of 172 acres up there. And there are ongoing discussions about other kinds of operations at this 3,000 acre site. It's the biggest industrial site in the park. It's an old mine. And Tupper Lakes had a large and varied level of grant support that continues. Tupper's got a lot going on that 10 years ago, it was pretty scary. It wasn't clear how Tupper was going to make it. Agriculture is definitely strengthening communities. It's bringing a parenting age cohort here. It shows up in the data. I'll show you in a minute. It's attracting conservation easement funding from OSI and ALT. CSA farming turns out to be a social community too. Institutional CSAs are growing. Farm stay vacations are a new idea. It's not hiking, but it's a different approach to how to enjoy the region and where to stay. Cuisine trails are being organized to highlight different food and beverage opportunities around the park. Local food in schools and local food in restaurants is increasingly popular, and compared to 10 years ago, it's huge. Support services like a food hub or an abattoir, a slaughterhouse have been established, but they're challenging businesses, and they still seem pretty fragile, although at the moment they're there. Local breweries continue opening. I can't say every town has a local brewery, but it sure seems that way. Some of them are growing. Local hops are a new crop. Craft distilleries are opening. My neighbor in Keene is Grist Mill Distilleries, and when he started, I wasn't sure this was a great idea, but he's got a real ongoing business. And Etain, you might not know about, it's the New York State certified medical cannabis grower in Chestertown. It just got sold for $247 million. And it's going to stay in Chestertown. Some towns are accepting retail cannabis shops. We'll see how it plays out, but $250 million, my goodness, that is a big success for the Adirondacks, no matter how you look at it. Small dairy and cheese operations have grown. There's work on cold weather grapes, other season extension projects, and remote area food distribution is beginning to get some traction now using a mobile market. It's organized by the Adirondack Health Institute, and it's got some 29 stops all over the park. Energy was a big part of particularly of the sustainable life. So home solar PV is expanding. Community solar, there are, I think now 6 community solar farms approved all around Ticonderoga in that region. There's a couple of small existing hydro power generations operations that are now able to sell their power through community net metering operations. Baseload biomass heat has grown. So the New York State Ray Brook campus, Paul Smith's College, a few schools and town buildings, certainly the Wild Center. They've all grown, but not home heat. Biomass for home heat hasn't really taken off despite lots of effort to try to get it to go. There's a pumped storage project in the old mine tunnels in Mariah that's in the last stages of FERC permitting. That'll be a fine project if it moves forward, and it pumps any kind of storage, pump storage or batteries or whatever are a critical part of making renewable power work. So I'm hoping that's going to go. Upgraded and new power transmission lines are under construction. It's worth noting that only a third of the power generated in the North Country, this is bigger than the park going up to the St. Lawrence Seaway, only a third of the power generated is actually consumed here. So these transmission lines are about getting power to other parts of the state. The Ticonderoga paper mill switched from oil to gas. Biomass electricity is seeing shutdowns, and the Lionsdale plant's actually being dismantled. So it's working in other parts of the world, but it is not working here. In transportation, well, it's electric vehicles, and their growth is a local fuel option compared to gasoline. EV charging stations are spreading rapidly. Stewards are starting to put them in at their various shops. The Lake Placid Tupper Rail Trail is coming soon. It's a major kind of inter-hamlet trail for you to be able to get from one place to another without getting in your car. There are lots of environmental steps taken. There are salt sheds. Many towns have been funded by the state. There's testing of different winter de-icing methods and policies and more science coming in that space. There's a demonstration of new open bottom culvert designs that have really worked. They have, there's a lot of culverts. It's going to take a long time to get this done, but at least there's a model of how to do it. Uber and Lyft are now legal here. That wasn't true 10 years ago. You might have thought that anybody could do that, but no, it was illegal. So I would expect that they'll grow over the next couple of years. The airports, Saranac Lake, Plattsburgh, Watertown, of course, the pandemic shut down air travel for a long time. It's operating now. The best thing that the news there is Saranac Lake has flights to JFK. But these are all essential air service funded operations, subsidized operations, and they're still small. It's not as if any airport's suddenly becoming a busy hub. The one that still has potential to do that is Plattsburgh, but that depends on the Canadian market, not on the New York market. The Amtrak operation from New York to Montreal is still suspended. And bus services, they exist, but there's no comprehensive look at where bus services are. There's a lot of work that could be done to improve that as a space. Climate change is a mixed bag. The Youth Summit at the Wild Center is going national, global, winning all kinds of awards. The new thing is the Timbuktu Climate Summer Institute, funded with quite a lot of money. It's a joint venture of the City University of New York, Brooklyn, and SUNY Environmental Science and Forestry campus in Newcomb. That hopes to get launched this summer. There's since the DEC released a report that greenhouse gas emissions have declined 6% from 6% from 2019. Heavier rain events, warmer nights, a shorter winter season, already passing 2 stretches of 90-degree weather here in May of this year. It's all coming. We will be a refuge for species moving north. Biodiversity should increase. It's kind of not maybe what you would think, but that's the expectation. Uneven winter weather causes a lot of problems for sports events. Winter tourism is still 30% of tourism, winter visits. The World University Games will be in January. All the venues have been rebuilt with new snowmaking, new refrigeration systems that are much more extensive than they were. There are a couple of towns doing clean energy community programs. Lyme disease is increasing due to warmer winters. And I'll note the recovery from Irene, I'm in Keene, where Irene did a lot of damage. Well, after 10 years, it's finally done. But wow, I can't imagine what it would take to do this if you got two of these storms 5 years apart. Now, demographics, this is interesting. Diversity wasn't really discussed 10 years ago, but now it's a recognized issue. And all the data remains the same. The news is it's a recognized issue and there's people actively working on it. Population from 2010 to 20 is down 5% across the park, but it varies widely by town. If you're really interested in this, go to the APA website and they have great maps of town by town data that show a population change over 2010 to 20. It's really interesting to see where it grew and where it shrank. The other note is that our population is older. 83% is over 18. New York State is 78%. So we're quite a bit older. Again, it varies widely, but the Champlain Valley, where the farming community is most robust, and the southern edges of the park are closer to the New York State average or at the New York State average than the rest of the park. And there's some parts of the park where it's not 83%, it's more like 90% of the population is over 18. Another bit, and this is from the census, only 55% of the homes are occupied. That means that the rest are second homes that were vacant, or they are short-term rentals that are vacant. Again, there's a big range from 21% to 77%. But that's a range across the towns in the park. And Hamilton County as a whole is 31%. So only 31% of the homes are actually occupied. That means, 69% of the homes are held by people that don't live here, or they're used as short-term rentals. There's a big message in there about available housing, much less affordable housing. It's not controlled by the normal forces of the market. Lack of workforce is a big deal. No J1 summer labor. These are the people that used to come from Europe to work at various resorts all around the park. None of that is available. It's a huge problem. There are boomers that move here early in retirement, but they often stay for only 6 months a year, or they leave in later years. So this is a risk that's become more evident depending on the retirement community as a basis for going forward in a big way. Education. Well, the pandemic, again, made internet and computers are perfectly acceptable for education. Well, I shouldn't say that. They were acceptable during the pandemic. There's lots of opinions about whether it's a good thing or not, but it certainly is standard. Most school systems are still shrinking. Level enrollments are viewed as good news. With all that, only one merger got approved by voters. There's E-Town, Elizabethtown, and Westport actually merged, but that's the only one. 2 small districts ceased operations. And what that means is the school district doesn't go away, but they tuition all of their students to nearby districts. Some districts were using tuition-paying students from nearby towns, or international students, and particularly in the case of Newcomb, were a way to grow the population in the school, make the school more dynamic and interesting. Well, that COVID turned off the whole international student thing. It'll come back at some point, but to date, that really stopped that cold. Several of the high schools get top level rankings in New York State statistics. They're not bad schools, they're fine schools. Merger sports, course sharing, cafeteria services, admin, all these things are becoming more common as shared services across different school districts. Let's move on to healthcare. Well, the implementation of ACA meant hospital admissions dropped. So if you were running a hospital, this wasn't necessarily good news, but it's what you had to deal with. And the result was that all these hospitals, Elizabethtown, Ticonderoga, Plattsburgh, Malone, they all aligned with UVM in Burlington. Adirondack Health remains independent. The There are 8 new primary care clinics. Most of them are Hudson Headwaters, or I think a small number of them are UVM clinics. There's a new assisted living and memory care facility in Willsboro that wasn't there 10 years ago. 3 nursing homes that were run by counties have changed owners and now privately operated. But they didn't. So the good news is they didn't go away. On the other hand, there isn't anything new in that area. The New York Insurance Exchange increased choice. It improved coverage at lower costs, and it expanded Medicaid to serve thousands of people in the region. Another pandemic success story was telemedicine. It's not like you couldn't do this before the pandemic, but the pandemic made it, it was a way you could see your doctor without going to a hospital or a medical office, which is not what you wanted to do during the peak of the pandemic. So telemedicine has brought a lot to the region. The Birth to 3 program and the Aging in Place Care Project, launched by Adirondack Foundation and Mercy Care, respectively, are focusing on the oldest and the youngest of our population. Opioids have become a big issue here. A detox center is opened in Saranac Lake that didn't exist. The shortage of EMT volunteers is a known problem. A number of different solutions are being tried. It's not solved yet, but it's headed in that direction. 2 unsolved problems are the lack of home health care in Essex County. In Hamilton County is really a dire issue. There's not a lot of health care there at all, and home health care was a big part of it. And the lack of childcare in the park, particularly as a result of the pandemic, is wreaking havoc on a number of communities. There's no simple, quick solution to this. There are a couple of different approaches that are being tried in different parts of the park. The state is pushing money at the problem, but it's a tough thing to put back together, and it's really important that we figure out how to do it, especially if we're going to attract parenting age population here. You have to have childcare. You're not going to do that if you don't have childcare. So government, remember in the end state about recreation, I said government shrinks and the private sector increases. Well, government is shrinking. The villages of Keysville and Port Henry have dissolved. They're the only part of government where voters can pass a referendum and say, well, we don't want a village of Port Henry anymore. So that's 2. I've read that there's a referendum expected to come up in Lake George, the village of Lake George, not the town, of course. You can't make a town go away by just deciding you don't want your town anymore, but you can make a village go away. Essex and Willsboro, Clifton and Fine are examples of increasingly aligned communities, but there are limits to this. Lake Placid voters rejected the consolidation of the village of Lake Placid Court consolidating with the North Elba Town Court. They rejected this twice. So there's limits to what people want to do when it comes to reducing government. State government jobs are declining. 3 prisons have closed in the region. Sunmount cut its resident population by 1/3. And the state moved very strongly to online services in a variety of different ways. And they're going to continue to do that because now the pandemic's proved that actually works pretty well. There are lots of efforts to do shared services amongst towns, emergency dispatch. You can read the list here, solid waste issues, IT, joint purchasing. Those are all ongoing. They're not earth-shattering. It's kind of bread and butter, get the work done kind of stuff, but it counts. There were steps made. There was a lot of interest 10 years ago in moving toward larger scale planning. There are a number of different words for it, but larger regional planning efforts. And there are steps towards that. One was called the Great South Woods effort. Another was called the 5 Towns Projects. And they've been somewhat successful, but not successful enough that you see this sort of thing proliferating around the park just yet. There've been no big changes to the public or private land use plans due to what I'll call insufficient alignment. There are lots of things that people would like to change, but there's not enough alignment across the various constituencies to make that happen. In terms of regulation, we passed 3 Article 14 amendments. The NICO mine expansion, now a moot issue. The Township 40 deed resolution, this was in Racket Lake, sorting out what was state land and what was private land passed. And the Health and Safety Land Bank that enabled you to bury a pipe under a road, build a bike path along a road, that kind of thing. That passed. There are new recreation uses. Biking and its various forms that you see now wasn't really a big deal 10 years ago, as it is now. Backcountry skiing also has grown into a much bigger deal than it was. So those kinds of new uses on forest preserve lands create new points of I'll call it robust discussion between various interest groups. The APA is generally respected and generally heeded, where some see shifts in APA permitting, others see proper application of the law. It's just, legal conflicts come with the territory. It's a regulatory agency, so it shouldn't be surprising that that's the case. But it is generally respected and heeded. It's not, there's really nobody arguing that the APA should be trashed and removed. It's not what's going on. Regional approaches are more common. You can see this list here of 8 different big regional efforts to bring together all the people working on tourism, or all the people working on diversity. That kind of thing has happened quite frequently since 10 years ago. And CGA continues meeting annually. Regional alignment that CGA can bring to the state, it means funds for the region. Most political leaders, they want to work on issues that have broad, deep support. They don't want to step into some nasty debate. So to the extent CGA can identify common ground interests with broad support, it'll get funded. And the best example of that is what we've done with water quality. So this was a chart we used to summarize the project 10 years ago. The orange line is about recreation. This green line is about sustainable life. And I think that's those two, that's about where we expected to be. There's no big surprise in either of those. Investment in recreation probably will begin to tail off. Investment in the sustainable life will have ups and downs because it needs behavior changes. It's not just about money. The idea that local government was going to do everything on their own, this is faded. I think there's very few local government people that want to try to solve every problem they have on their own. They realize they have to act more regionally, and that is what this last line here is. Regionalism is growing. So these are the big shifts: lack of jobs to lack of workforce and the rise of remote work. Lack of affordable housing to lack of available housing at all. Lack of rooms for tourists to short-term rentals everywhere. This might have a link to the lack of available housing. Desire for more tourists to crowds on trails. And how do we manage that? Very little solar energy to fairly widespread private solar. No discussion of diversity to the diversity issue front center funded, actively worked in a variety of ways, and skepticism about electric vehicles to the pretty clear success of electric vehicles with a lot of momentum heading in that direction. All right, there's for more detail, you can go look at these 2 websites. The first one, .org, is what we did. The second one, .net, is the database of So What's Happened. Okay, and with that, I'm going to turn off. Well, maybe I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Dave. That was great. I am Leslie Carrison, a member of the Common Ground Alliance core team and the Adirondack Program Director with the Northern Forest Center. And I am here to facilitate a few minutes of question and answer. If you have a question that you haven't yet typed into the Q&A box, please feel free to do so. I guess I want to start, Dave, with a big question, which is just of the trends that you're seeing, and you've commented a little bit about this along the way, but which ones do you think are pointing towards the desirable end states that we ranked as desirable, the sustainable park and usable park, and which ones do you worry about pointing us towards the less desirable states?
Well, I think the success of a wide variety of initiatives around broadband and the push that got because of the pandemic, both in terms of jobs and labor, but also in terms of healthcare and education, that really has changed everything about rural life, and certainly in the park. And it all aims for this sustainable life scenario C kind of look at things. There are downsides to it. You know, it's arguable that social media has created lots of problems with crowds, but if the crowds get too nasty, social media will make the crowds go away too. So I don't know how that'll all turn out in the end. The things that I worry about, I actually think the scariest thing is our forest and the insects, particularly the algids in the case of hemlocks, oak wilt, and the ash trees, emerald ash borer. These things are going to change our forest. You know, this has 15 years more to run. This was a 25-year vision. We're at year 10. Well, 15 years from now, we'll know, but it's not looking good. It's not like nobody's trying to address this. There's lots of work being attempted, but it's not satisfying, and it is concerning. In terms of getting people to, there's still this issue of lack of workforce has to do with how do we attract people to come live here? And you're very involved in some efforts around that. But it's, you know, it's kind of obvious, but two essential things are people have to have a place to live that somehow is you know, commensurate to the income that they're going to have. And if they're parenting age people, which is who we really want because of school populations and all that, well, then we are going to have to figure out answers to the childcare problem. And it's a really, the two of these, housing, affordable or achievable housing, and childcare are issues that are really gonna have to get solved in the long term for the park to be a happy place. I think diversity that'll be okay. I'm very impressed and very pleased with how that's going. I'm not so worried about that. It needs to happen, but it's got a lot of energy behind it. But pests in forests, which have all kinds of ramifications, housing for regular people to live here, and childcare. Those are the ones I think are a big problem.
Great. Sort of a somewhat related question that comes from Dakota Casserly was wondering about sort of the demographic piece, so kind of a follow-on to what you've just shared. And he asked that he said census data continues to show population decline, and do you think there will be measurable change in the next 10 years, up or down? And I guess I would add my piece to that question is, you know, this notion of the aging population and a lack of a parenting age cohort and school shrinking, sort of where you see those trends.
Yeah, well, you know, 10 years ago, you know, it was a push to suggest that the Champlain Valley farming communities would be strong enough to actually create a parenting cohort there that didn't exist previously. I mean, the farms were abandoned, and but it's worked. And it's the Champlain Valley and the southern edges of the park that have demographic statistics in terms of age that are close to the rest of the state. So that's encouraging. At least it's a proof case that this can be done. It's not a problem that is you just throw up your arms and say, oh, it's never gonna get fixed. Well, we have fixed it in some parts of the park. Parts a big place. So in that sense, it's encouraging. I think more broadly in the park, the answers to this are still back to basic stuff: broadband, housing, childcare. If you can fix those, then you're it's like knocking down barriers that people are going to see, that if they want to move here, those are the things they're going to look at. If they can't find a house, if there's no childcare, and if there's no internet, there's no cell service, they're not going to come live here. Even if it's some nice dream they have, they're not going to do it. I think in 10 years we'll find that this it's not going to grow enormously, but it won't have that feeling of edging towards an ever smaller, lesser, disappearing region. I think it'll turn around with those things. 10 years is a long time.
Well, everybody mark your calendars for 2032 for the
I don't know if I'm
20-year
going to do
update.
this.
So Larissa Reed has a question. She asks, what opportunities or areas of action do you see in policy, in organizations, or in programs that can nudge communities even further towards the desired end state? So yeah, the opportunity piece.
So in the case of the sustainable life, the opportunities there were for a localization of the economy and the addition of broadband. So in a local environment, you can foster all that, right? You can encourage people to use local building materials. You can figure out how to get broadband in your community if it's not there already, and figure out how to get people to find work opportunities using remote tools. That's all within the domain of a community to do that. I think most of the work that's been done on solar has been done. ANCO organized the early work of it. It was done by teams of people that would go around from community to community and run local meetings about, would you like to have solar panels on your house? Do you think it would work? How would you do this? And it's very effective. It's again, feet on the ground, kind of local people. It's not a highfalutin, wondering how you're going to do this kind of project. That really worked. So it's other policy level things. Well, housing, broadband, childcare. In Keene, we're trying to do a thing with childcare that's building a center instead of a home-based care system. There's a community effort to build a center that can handle 30 or 40 kids. The idea being that it'll bring more young people to the community. It'll add to the school population over time. It's also a source of potential jobs for people that want to work in childcare. But I got to tell you, it's hard, and I've been involved in this, and it's really difficult to make the math work, the financial math work. We're doing it. Watch this space, but it's not easy. The other alternative is to do this on a home-based system, where a homemaker can care for up to 8 kids, I think it is, and with an assistant that can have 16. So that's a cheaper way to do it. I'm not sure it's particularly stable. That's what we had in Keene for a long time, but all those people decided not to do it anymore. And recruiting people into that space as solo practitioners, well, we'll see. But it is another way you can do it. That's a hard one. That's a hard one. I think housing.
Excellent. Well, I'll throw one.
Go ahead.
Can I throw one last hard question your way, just to add to the list? This is Donna Watton poses a question asking if we solve these problems of housing, broadband, and childcare in the next 10 years, what do you think we might expect to be the big challenges 10 years out? I know you've spoken already to the forest pest issue.
Right.
Are there other things that are sort of lurking in the horizons for you as
would-
long-term concerns?
I would like to think that by the time another 10 years goes by, we will come to alignment. This might be different from agreement, but we'll come to alignment around an updated state and private land use plans. How are we going to, I mean, it's served us well for 50 years. Everybody can be proud of that, but it's old and it needs to get better, and there needs to be alignment around what better means. I don't think that's going to happen. It's not going to happen now, but by 10 years from now, I'd like to think that we can address these, and the park will be much healthier and much better by thinking through what needs are for housing, for example, and to deal with forest decay because of insects and all this stuff. They're hard ones. They're hard ones. We're not ready to do this right now, but in 10 years, we should be. I hope so. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, there is an uplifting note to end on. We are near the end of our time, and I have a couple of closing remarks to offer. First, and most importantly, just to thank you, Dave, for providing, this sort of steady voice on these important issues and the analytical perspective that you've brought to helping us track our way through this and see the important themes and help us keep our eyes on the ball in terms of getting to the end states that we want to be at. So thank you. There were a few questions about sharing your slides and this presentation. There will be, at some point, not immediately, but soon, a recording of this available at commongroundadk.org at the CGA website. And we will talk also about, Dave, the possibility of making your presentation available as a separate download there. So watch the space for that exact answer, but I think we ought to be able to do that.
Yeah, I think the slides will be on the CGA website. The slides themselves probably get up there before the recording does.
Yeah, awesome, great. Importantly, I want to acknowledge a question that Colin Powers asked about sort of the ongoing opportunity for CGA to sort of provide an antidote to national polarization in terms of pulling people together in a shared dialogue. And so I guess, Colin, I would suggest that that's a great question for you to bring on June 15th to the this year's in-person Common Ground Alliance meeting, which will be held in person for the first time in the last couple of years, as you all know. It will be at Gore Mountain in North Creek on the 15th, and you can register now at commongroundadk.org. So I think we have a great opportunity to take the thoughts and energy and momentum that we've all gotten out of this presentation and bring it into that forum and decide how to channel that, as Dave said earlier, to provide a common voice for our shared perspectives and help establish our priorities moving forward. So I encourage everyone to register and attend on the 15th. And I want to thank everyone for participating today and attending, and I hope that you will all share, encourage your friends and colleagues to watch this presentation in its recorded form at commongroundadk.org. Thanks, everybody. And thanks, Dave.